After Iran, is Cuba next? Tensions are high in the Middle East after clashes with Iran over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, sharp new pressure on Cuba is raising questions. Is the Trump administration turning its focus to the Caribbean? Could decades of rivalry explode into open conflict? Here is a clear look at the fact. Background on US-Iran situation. The US and Iran engaged in direct conflict with Iran starting in late February 2026. Key issues included Iran's nuclear program and its control over the Strait of Hormuz, a vital waterway for about 20% of the world's oil trade. Iran tried to block shipping. The US responded with naval operations to reopen the strait and struck Iranian target. A fragile ceasefire is now in place as of May 2026, with talks ongoing. President Trump has paused some military moves, saying progress is being made toward a deal, but the situation remains tense with occasional incidents. US-Cuba long history of tension. The US and Cuba have had a difficult relationship since the 1959 Cuban Revolution, when Fidel Castro took power and turned Cuba into a communist state allied with the Soviet Union. In 1961, the US backed the failed invasions at the Bay of Pigs. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world close to nuclear war. The US has maintained an economic embargo for over 60 years, with some easing under President Obama and tightens under Trump's first term. Cuba has faced economic struggle relying on allies like Venezuela for oil. It has also built ties with countries the US sees as rivals, including Russia, China, and Iran. Recent escalations with Cuba in 2026. After taking office again, President Trump declared a national emergency on January 29, 2026, citing Cuba as a threat to US security. Reasons include Cuba's alliance with US advisories and supports for groups like those in Venezuela. Key actions: tightened sanctions and restricted oil shipments to Cuba, worsening fuel shortage, blackouts, and economic hardship. Following the fall of Venezuela's Maduro earlier in 2026, Cuba lost a major oil supplier. On May 20, 2026, the US indicated former Cuban leader Raul Castro over the 1996 shoot-down of civilian planes that killed Americans. US naval presence increased in the Caribbean with exercises and surveillance flights. Trump has spoken of a possible friendly takeover or regime change if Cuba does not negotiate. Cuba has condemned these moves as aggression, prepared defenses, and said it is open to talk but will resist any invasion. Reports mention Cuban fears of military actions, though no inventions has been launched. Is war with Cuba likely? No direct military conflict has started. The US approach focuses on maximum pressure through sanctions, indictments, and diplomacy to push for changes in Cuba's government. Pentagon oppositions exist, but officials say no invasion is imminent. Prediction market currently put the chance of a US invasion in 2026 at around 24%. The situation echoes past pressure campaigns but carries risk of miscalculation, especially with Cuba's outdated military and regional alliance. Cuba's small size, proximity to the US, and history make any escalation different from the Iran conflict. Human cost in Cuba shortage and blackouts are already high, raising humanitarian concerns. What happens next? Talks between the US and Cuba reported at early stages. Outcomes depends on whether Cuba meets US demands on alliances, human rights, and governance, or if pressure leads to internal changes. The Iran ceasefire shows Trump prefers deals when possible, but he has been firm on threats near US borders. This is a fast-moving story. The US aims to counter influence from rivals in its hemisphere without another major war, but the path remains uncertain. Stay tuned for updates and diplomacy or further sanctions.